Oh, the grand old Duke of York! He had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill, and he marched them down again. And when they were up, they were up. And when they were down, they were down. And when they were only halfway up, they were neither up nor down. It's a rhyme we've all sang in childhood, but behind its cheerful beat lies a very old mystery, one that has puzzled historians, folklorists, and curious minds for generations. Because while children chant it without question, the rest of us are left wondering, who was the grand old Duke of York? Why was he marching his men up and down a hill? And is this really just a simple children's rhyme? Welcome back, Darklings. The version most of us know, the grand old Duke of York, was cemented into the nursery in 1913. It appeared in Arthur Rackham's beautifully illustrated edition of Mother Goose, but the rhyme had been around long before that. In 1892, folklorist G.F. Northall published a version collected from oral tradition in English folk rhymes. In that one, the Duke was not grand, but mighty. The title, Duke of York, has belonged to many men across English history, and over the years several have been put forward as the true subject of the rhyme. The first candidate is Richard Plantagenet, a powerful nobleman at the heart of the bloody Wars of the Roses. In 1460, Richard, Duke of York, led around 8,000 men in the north of England. From his stronghold at Sandal Castle, perched high on a mound above the plain, he marched his troops down from the hill to meet a much larger Lancastrian force. It was a mistake. Richard was killed in the Battle of Wakefield, along with many of his men. So the basic pattern is there: a duke, thousands of men, a hill, and a ruinous outcome. But it doesn't quite fit. Richard wasn't old, nor remembered as particularly grand or mighty, and there was no repetitive marching, no up and down again, just one disastrous decision. Some have pointed instead to an earlier incident in 1452, the Dartford standoff, when Richard mounted an armed protest against King Henry VI, only to lose his nerve and disband his forces without a fight when faced with the king's larger army. In that case, he quite literally marched his men up and back down again. It's closer, but still speculative. Most historians agree, while there are echoes of the rhyme in Richard's story, the connection is tenuous at best. Our second candidate is James II, who once held the title Duke of York before becoming king. His reign came to a dramatic end in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when he led his army to Salisbury Plain to resist the invasion of his son-in-law, William of Orange. But things quickly fell apart. As William's forces advanced, James's own men began to defect. Officers switched sides, confidence crumbled, and with his support collapsing, James abandoned the campaign, retreated to London, and ultimately fled the country without a battle. A failed march, a royal humiliation, it almost fits. The image of a grand old duke mustering his men only to hurry home empty-handed certainly echoes the rhyme's tone of mocking futility. But by this point, James was a king, not a duke, and he was remembered as such. The rhyme refers to a hill, not the flat chalk lands of Salisbury. Besides, would Protestant England really have described a deposed Catholic monarch as grand or mighty? It's unlikely. So that brings us to our third candidate, and this is where things get interesting. Prince Frederick, Duke of York, was the second son of King George III, and crucially, he wasn't just a royal. He was Commander-in-Chief of the British Army during the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Throughout his career, Frederick was very much in the public eye, a high-ranking military leader who, fairly or unfairly, became known for costly blunders and empty showmanship, and several moments from his career seem to march in lockstep with the rhyme. In 1793, he led a major British campaign into Flanders, but after some initial success, the tide turned. By summer 1794, his forces were outmanoeuvred by the French, forcing a slow retreat north through the Netherlands, and eventually back to Britain. 10,000 men marched out and came back again. It seems to fit. There's just one issue. Flanders is flat. The only notable hill in the area is at Cassel, a town perched on a high ridge in French Flanders. Some Victorian writers speculated that Frederick's army climbed it, but the military records say otherwise. His troops never came within 10 miles of Cassel. The same year, in the Battle of Torquay, Frederick led an advance, only to be forced into a rapid and humiliating retreat. One British officer even called it an astonishing defeat, and the pattern continued. In 1799, during another campaign in the Netherlands, Frederick initially scored a major win, capturing the Dutch fleet. But the victory didn't last. The advance stalled, and at the Battle of Bergen, he ordered a full retreat, despite having superior numbers. At the time, the press had a field day, but it wasn't all failure. Later in life, Frederick proved himself in a different way. As Commander-in-Chief, he oversaw sweeping reforms in the army, improving soldier pay, rooting out corruption, and raising standards of training and discipline. He even earned the nickname, the soldier's friend. Because of this, some argue the rhyme might not be mockery at all, but a fond tribute, a nod to the Duke's constant presence at military drills, watching the men march up the hill and down again. But this is where the trail grows stranger. The earliest known version of the rhyme appears in print as far back as 1642, under the title Old Tarleton Song. It reads, "The King of France with 40,000 men came up a hill and so came down again." It's attributed to Richard Tarleton, the most famous clown, jester and satirist of the Elizabethan stage, a performer beloved by the public and by Queen Elizabeth herself, which makes this little verse almost certainly a parody, a comic jab, wrapped in rhyme. Some scholars have tried to pin the satire to real events, suggesting it may mock King Henry IV of France, who fought in the late French wars of religion and was known for both bold campaigns and sudden retreats. But in truth, it may not have needed a specific monarch at all, because in Elizabethan England, mocking the French was practically a national pastime. The two nations had a long and bitter rivalry. The 100 Years' War, dynastic squabbles, religious tension, and endless power games across Europe. By the late 1500s, when Tarleton was performing, anti-French sentiment ran deep in English culture. So it's entirely plausible, even likely, that this early rhyme wasn't mocking a particular king, but simply the French in general. But the mystery doesn't end there. Because in the Netherlands there's a version of the rhyme with different lyrics entirely. The hero, Prince Maurice, came with 100,000 men. With them he went up the hill and also down again. Prince Maurice of Orange is remembered as one of the great soldier princes of Dutch history. He led the Netherlands through the 80 Years' War, the long, bitter struggle for independence from Spain. But crucially, he wasn't just a warrior. He was a military reformer. At a time when most European armies were little more than unruly bands of mercenaries, Maurice did something no one else was doing. He introduced daily drills, formal training, and precise battlefield formations. Inspired by ancient Roman military tactics, he transformed warfare from brute chaos into something methodical, and at the time, to many of his contemporaries, it looked strange, almost absurd. Why march soldiers up and down? Why wear them out with the same steps over and over? To outsiders it looked pointless, until it started winning wars. Maurice's army became one of the most disciplined and effective in Europe. His innovations spread across the continent, and today, the very idea of a modern army, troops drilled in formation, trained as a single unit, can be traced back to him. So now when we hear the rhyme, he marched them up to the top of the hill, and he marched them down again, it suddenly fits. Not as a story of failure, but as a comic reflection of Maurice's revolutionary training methods. There's just one problem. This Dutch version, naming Maurice directly, doesn't appear in print until the 20th century. It doesn't mean it wasn't sung earlier. Many rhymes lived and died in oral folk tradition. But without printed evidence, we can't say for certain whether this was the original or a later Dutch adaptation of the English rhyme, repurposed to honour their own drill-obsessed hero. Still, it fits uncannily well. So what do you think? Is this the rhyme's true origin, hidden in Dutch drill fields instead of English hills? Or is it just another chapter in a story older than we realise? Let me know in the comments. And if your thirst for nursery rhyme origins still lingers, Click here to uncover the sordid secret behind Rub-a-Dub-Dub. See you in a future video.